term, justified is defined as to prove or show to be just, right, or reasonable by Merriam-Webster. Institutions, including government, schools, and companies, are the decision makers who may choose to implement or not implement affirmative action programs. Thus, I value proper institutional action. These institutional decision makers evaluate many factors when determining the proper course of action and must act under conditions of uncertainty. This demands a consequentialist calculus. Gooden writes, all choices, public and private alike, are made under some degree of uncertainty, but private individuals will usually have more complete information about their own circumstances. Public officials, in contrast, are relatively poorly informed as to the effects that their choices will have on individuals. What they do know are generalities, aggregates, and averages. That is enough to allow public policymakers to use the utilitarian calculus to choose general rules of conduct. I offer the criterion of maximizing economic benefits. Economic analysis is the best way to make decisions, Paul R. Portney writes. To ascertain the net effect of a policy, we must first have a way of measuring the gains and the losses, the aggregate of the effects on the individuals who constitute society. Benefits and costs, even though they are almost always expressed in dollar terms, go well beyond changes in individual income. If someone's well-being is improved because of cleaner air, for example, he experiences a benefit. This standard is the most complete and encompassing standard because we can weigh the competing factors that institutional decision makers have to evaluate. This is the fairest standard because no arguments or positions will be arbitrarily excluded. I contend that discrimination has caused economic harms and affirmative action remedies those harms and brings additional economic benefit. A. Discrimination has led to residential segregation. DeLue, White, Ho, Meza, Kerting, DeFried, and Harris write, I'll refer to this card as DeLue. Discrimination on the basis of race continued to pervade nearly every aspect of the housing market in the United States. Historically, policies and practices of the United States government, as well as state and local governments, have helped to create highly segregated residential patterns across the United States. Today, many of the government's programs and policies continue to perpetuate segregation and concentrate poverty in communities of color, albeit without the explicit design of earlier programs. These federal programs are augmented by state and local government policies that contribute to residential segregation, including exclusionary zoning rules and school attendance boundaries. Important. There are two impacts. One, the effects of discrimination are still very real today. Two, residential segregation means that people don't intermingle. They don't attend the same schools, frequent the same social events, or become friends with one another. B, wealth is concentrated among whites who don't intermingle with other races due to housing segregation. Annie Lowry writes, as of 2010, white families on average earned about $2 for every $1 that black and Hispanic families earned. By the most recent data, the average white family has about $632,000 in wealth versus $98,000 for black families and $110,000 for Hispanic families. So 6 to 1 there. Annie Lowry continues. Many experts consider the wealth gap to be more harmful than the income gap as it perpetuates from generation to generation and has a powerful effect on economic security and mobility. Young black people are much less likely than young white people to receive a large sum from their parents or other relatives to pay for college, start a business, or make a down payment on a home. That, in turn, makes their wealth-building prospects shakier as they move into adulthood. There are two impacts. First, housing discrimination is perpetuating residential segregation. Second, resources are concentrated among whites who are unlikely to have relationships with people of other races. C, opportunity isn't merit-based, it's relationship-based. Wendy Kaufman writes, Youngquist says at least 70%, if not 80% of jobs are not published. The vast majority of hiring is friends and acquaintances hiring other trusted friends and acquaintances. The impact is that we don't need affirmative action because minorities are underqualified. We need it because they don't have the right networks to get opportunity due to residential segregation. The impacts. First, a diverse workforce drives economic growth. Sophia Kirby and Crosby Burns, right? Our nation's human capital substantially grows as more minorities enter the workforce. A McKinsey & Company study found that the increase in women's overall share of labor in the United States over the past 40 years has accounted for about a quarter of current GDP. 2. Diversity boosts creativity and innovation, major drivers of economic prosperity. Sophia Kirby and Crosby Burns, right? Bringing together workers with different qualifications, backgrounds, and experiences are all key to effective problem solving on the job. Of 321 large global enterprises, companies with at least $500 million in annual revenue, surveyed in a Forbes study in 2011, 85% agreed or strongly agreed that diversity is crucial to fostering innovation in the workplace. And innovation accounts for nearly 85% of economic output. Nathan Rosenberg writes, there are only two ways of increasing the output of the economy. One, you can increase the number of inputs that go into the productive process. Or two, you can think of new ways in which you can get more output from the same number of inputs. The measured growth of inputs between 1870 and 1950 could account for only about 15% of the actual growth in the output of the economy. There was an unexplained residual of no less than 85%. That means innovation accounts for 85% of our economy. And for those reasons, I urge an affirmation. It's kind of stuck sometimes.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about framework.
Okay.
So, So you talk about how your standard is like more fair because it's inclusive. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, any impact can impact back to it. All you have to do is quantify it in terms of economic impact. So you can quantify everything in terms of dollars. You do that, you can weigh into it.
Okay, so like, what if I have impacts that don't quantify into dollars, but obviously have, like, important implications for institutions?
Everything can be quantified into dollars. Now, you may not have done that in this round, but I would challenge you to do that, or at least approximate it.
Can you quantify human happiness?
Yes.
Okay. Can you
economists can measure it. Now, it's not. That doesn't mean this person has more money, but we can equate a monetary value to it so that we can compare.
So like
things.
I'm $7 of happy right now. Is that the kind of claim?
Yes, economists can absolutely do that.
How? Like, what is the process for quantifying how happy?
They measure it. There are entire fields of study that measure that. And in fact, I read a lot
how
of
many like
heat-ons
of money does the AF get us in total?
It represents 85% of the economy.
No, but like how much money is that? Because you say I should have it in dollars.
GDP is about I think somewhere like. I mean, my number's going to be way off, but I mean, we're in trillions of dollars. Okay. I represent 85% of that.
So the only reason why this is good, like this economic benefit, is because it does some good for institutions, and these institutions in turn provide some good.
Here's the reason why it's good. It allows us to access everybody's impacts, and it allows us to compare things that otherwise wouldn't be compared.
Like I don't hear a lot of impacts that actually have like a dollar sign next to them. So I don't understand how.
My argument is that they should. Like that is how policy decision makers should do it. There's a whole.
And the reason why is because it provides some greater good in terms of happiness or policies.
I'm not impacting to happiness, but like the state has, or states or institutions, right? They have to weigh lots of different concerns,
so like,
right? They're not just concerned about human rights. They're not just concerned about equality. They're not just concerned about happiness. They're not just concerned about the economy. They're not just concerned about the environment. They're concerned about lots of different things. My argument is that if we can quantify those things and then compare them to one another, and that's how we can actually make decisions that take multiple factors into account.
Okay, if I demonstrate the affirmative case actually leads to more discrimination, I get a link into all of your economic impacts, right?
You would have to prove it leads to more discrimination in the workplace, because that's where my impacts are.
So what if I say that, like, okay, well, affirmative action...
Actually, let me clarify. Not more discrimination, less diversity. I don't really care if people are discriminated against in terms of my impacts. What I really care about is there diversity so that we can solve problems. That's the specific link.
Okay. Starting job.
Okay.
Last time you watched her, she lost.
That's true. But I won that tournament.
You did win that tournament, but they stopped watching.
Yeah.
It's their fault.
It's an excellent laptop holder you have there, Tyler.
Thank you.
He'll be okay. Really,
All right, I have 250 left. The order is going to be one off AC, and then like maybe if there's time, there's going to be another off, but probably not.
Was that a bone from the judges?
Oh.
That was a.
I'm just wondering if there is the possibility, like,
If the second off will not be long.
I can blow it on the same piece of paper.
Probably. The first off is pretty long. Second off is really short. You know what? I'll just give you this paper.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry. I can like see the longer piece of paper.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Good. Genocide must be rejected. The ultimate threshold of ethics. Any normative system justifying genocide must be rejected a priori. Meister. Fidelity also, which has touched on radical evil, precludes the pursuit of any higher good through politics. The upholders of ethics make consensual identification of evil upon the supposition of radical evil. It exemplifies radical evil. One combative imitation, repetition of rights must be prevented at all costs. More precisely, whose non-repetition of rights and norm judgment in all situations. The Nazi extermination is radical evil, and the day provides our time a unique, unraveling, transcendent, unstable measure of evil, pure and simple. And the discourse of like economics and human rights is only justified on this basis. McDonald. Concept of universal human rights, crimes against humanity, notions of cosmopolitan morality all stem from the lessons of the Holocaust and this particular ideology of the United Nations. The UN Convention on Genocide and Human Rights were created in the aftermath of Nazi crimes. The Affirmative inscribes rights to the fact of life itself, politicizing bare life, which necessitates biopolitical capitalist order. Agamben, specifically, she links into this like really, really hard because she thinks that you can quantify everything by a dollar figure. Starting from a certain point, every decisive political event was double-sided spaces, liberties, and rights won by individuals and their conflict with central powers, all simultaneously prepared an inscription in the individual size within a state order, thus offering a foundation of the very sovereign power which they wanted to liberate themselves, and only because biological life and its needs they can't become the politically decisive fact it is possible to understand the otherwise incomprehensible rapidity which the 20th century parliamentary democracies led with the strength of totalitarian states, and in which this century's totalitarian states were able to be converted almost without interruption to parliamentary democracies. Once the fundamental referent becomes very like traditional political distinctions lose their clarity and intelligibility and enter into a zone of indistinction, and the logic of liberal equality underneath the market requires a biopolitical discourse which ignores the constructive nature of civilization. Sorensen. But community is not a natural formation. It has to be constructed in Western societies. New conceptualization exemplified by concerns related to minority communities, gender equality, and specific community programs and affirmative action. This entails biopolitical separation, losing way of the international development, security policy, and the global periphery, liberalism, rediscovered multi-ethnic, post-conflict societies, tribal, communal, and sectarian features which are not discovered but addressed but regenerated as a necessary correlate of government and a new kind of governmental rationality. The shared ethnic cartography reflected biopolitical control measures which are operated during ethnic or religious fault line. And this turns case because it demonstrates that her concerns about affirmative action are actually going to reify those discrimination and like discrimination in the workplace in particular, and like obviously it would apply to that specific context. The result is unending Holocaust and ever-increasing risk of extinction, Foucault. Wars were never as bloody as they have been since the 19th century, and never reported the routine switches to the Holocaust in the world population, but this formidable power of death now presents itself as a counterpart to a power that exerts positive influence on life that endeavors to administer, optimize, and multiply, subjecting to precise controls and comprehensive regulation. Wars are no longer which, and they were sovereign unless they defended their wage on behalf of the existence of everyone, entire population, motivated through the purpose of wholesale slaughter in the name of life, necessity. Massacres become vital. The atomic situation out the end point of this process of power to expose the whole population deaths, the understudied power to guarantee the individual's continued existence. And the K turns case, biopolitics makes racism and genocide a necessity, Foucault 2. Racism took shape at this point. It was then the whole politics settlement accompanied by a long series of permanent interventions, level of body conduct, health, and everyday life. Receive their color and their justification, the mythical concern protecting the purity of blood and ensuring the triumph of race, the eugenic ordering society with all it implied by way of the extension and intensification of micropowers and the guise of unrestricted state control was accompanied by the exaltation of superior blood, later implied the systematic genocide of others and risk of exposing oneself to total sacrifice. And the K turns case, biopolitical capitalism produces not only a global South, which is systematically excluded from the spoils of exploitation, but also localized domestic Souths, which we know as ghettos, which reify the very economic situation she talks about. This not only turns the case, provides me another link to the framework, to losing to Atari 1. States of the center deal not only a third world, each of them has not only an external third world, but there are internal third worlds that rise within them and work with them from the inside. The world, the worldwide axiomatic installs high industry and highly industrial, the agriculture, the periphery, provisionally and reserving the center for so-called post-industrial activities. More installs peripheral zones of underdevelopment in the center, internal south, and internal third worlds. These phenomena confirm the difference between the syndicates, enslavement, and classical subjection. The opposition between the axiomatic and the flows that it does not succeed in mastering become all the more accentuated. perpetuated. The only escape is a line of flight, a breaking with the discourses of modernity. This entails not only ceasing to continue the discourse of economicism, but moreover breaking with the dominance of aberration forms of discourse altogether, to losing Guattari too. Semiotic change of every nature connected with the very diverse modes according to the coding that bring in not only different machines to sign, but also states of being different. Say collective assemblages of enunciation moving directly within the machinic assemblages. It is not impossible to make a radical break between machines and signs and their objects, even when linguists claim to confine themselves to what is explicit and make no presuppositions about language. It is still a spirit of discourse implying particular modes of assemblage and social powers. Chomsky's grammaticality, the categorical system that dominates every sentence, is more fundamentally a marker of power than a symbolic marker. Our criticism of these linguistic models is not they are too abstract, but on the contrary, they are not abstract enough that they do not reach the abstract machine that connects a language to semantic and pragmatic contents of statements, to collective assemblages of enunciation, to a whole micropolitics of the social field. Thus, the critique precludes the AC, or comes before the AC in 4 ways. First, it operates briefly out of the delusion Guattari evidence. The alternative indicates the importance of counter-discourse, undermine the apparatus under essentialist mode of language and discourse. The pre-fiat argument come before post-fiat argument, since the real world affects the world, whereas fiat is entirely illusory. 2, it establishes an a priori ethical framework which precludes the AC. 3, it turns the AC. And 4, even if we accept the affirmative framework, distinction precludes our link into the standard, because the only reason why this economism and stuff would actually be good is because it provides some benefit to real human beings. It also links into our value of like institutions and stuff like that, because it obviously promotes institutions which are incredibly damaging. Go to the good and evidence in the AC. First, the good and evidence justifies all consequential benefits, meaning she can't link me through this quantification stuff below. That, and second, the quantification stuff below would actually link herself into the K even harder, because I'm actually contesting the idea that we can quantify human happiness, and that this notion of human capital, that people are herds which contribute to the global economy and things like that. So if anything, it's just links her harder into the K, and so now we can go down to the offense. So preclude the AC in the ways I said, and she said if I prove that it's going to be increased discrimination in the workplace, then you vote for me. You can turn it affirmative action provides a ruse of solvency, leading to less action to reduce inequality. Alexander 4 out. Affirmative action acts disparity of racial inequality in America, leading to greatly exaggerated claims of racial progress and overly optimistic assessments of the future of Americans. Seeing black men graduate from Harvard and Yale become CEOs and corporate lawyers, not to mention the president of the United States, causes us all marvel what long way we've come. This recent data shows how much of black progress is missed. The child poverty rate is actually added in. It was 1968 unemployment rates in black communities rival those third world countries. When we pull back the curtain and take a look into our so-called colorblind society creates without affirmative action, we see a familiar social, political, and economic structure, the structure of racial caste. And it's how it weighs all of her impacts, because it not only talks about discrimination in the workplace, but also discrimination generally in the production of the ghetto that I've talked about.
Yes.
Buttons are sticky. Oh, you like them? Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Wow. All right, let's start. Walk me through your case.
Okay, so the very beginning it talks about, it's the ethical framework. So that's the Meister evidence and the McDonald evidence.
Why do you care about ethics?
I say that it's the basis for any normative system, including the
Okay,
AC.
normative means ethics, so
Normative
yes, it's the
means
basis
to
of-
do actions, to advocate something, which includes ethics, but
do
also
you have a
includes-
definition of normative?
No.
Okay, I mean, normative is usually like right and wrong, right?
Well, yeah, you're saying that you should do something. That's what the AC is. It's a normative case that one ought to do something.
Okay,
This
keep
can
going.
be ethical, it can be whatever. My point is that all of these are based on the same thing.
And what's that?
The identification of a radical evil, and ethics is based on the non-repetition of radical evil.
Okay, you lost me.
So,
try that one again.
Okay, so basically, ethics in all normative systems are all based upon this consensual identification of an evil.
Of what identification?
Consensual identification?
So like we agree on it.
Yeah, not necessarily that you as an individual agree, but in the construction of normative frameworks, we have to agree at a base level that certain things are wrong.
So the system would not help us understand what's wrong. We have to already know what's wrong first.
That's not what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what you mean by the system. If you're talking
It's
about this,
normative system.
no, it's like my case is normative. I'm not critiquing normativity. I'm saying instead there's a normative reason for why you ought to negate. So, like, when we engage in this decision making, we have to, in order to get off the ground and a foundation for ethics, make an agreement upon an identification of radical evil, which I take to be genocide and the Holocaust. And I
Okay.
provide another warrant with the McDonald evidence.
Okay.
And
So
that-
your entire case is based upon this rejection of the Holocaust. being
well, I mean, it
genocide.
also turns the AC, it outweighs the
Okay, I
AC.
understand the impacts. That's
Right.
the basis of the argument.
The framework is this genocide stuff.
Okay, why is that like the frame? Why is the radical the frame we should focus on versus like everyday evil or everyday bad? things?
Because we would only justify the reasons why everyday. So, like, stealing is wrong because that means I'm wronging someone. And to wrong someone is wrong because it can end up in horrible situations like, you know, the Holocaust.
So
or
if like the
genocide
Holocaust had
generally.
never happened, would we still have ethics?
We would make consensual identification upon a different evil.
And what would it be without the Holocaust?
That's impossible for me to say. I don't.
What
like,
was it in like
counterfactual.
1930?
In 1930,
Like-
probably World War One.
And what was it before that?
I don't need an entire history of.
Well, I mean,
what
I
has
guess the
been.
point I make is it sort of seems like without these major atrocities, we don't have ethics at all. That almost seems like atrocities might even be good because they help us understand ethics. So without
No,
them, we
that's
wouldn't
not
have
my
them.
position at all. I'm not an advocate of genocide. I rather, like, I'm not saying that these things are good, but they are constitutive of ethical theory. So, like, if things were great, we had nothing to identify evil with, then yeah, we wouldn't need ethics because everyone would be fantastic and great, right? Like, that's just obvious. If everyone was great, we wouldn't need ethics.
Okay, can I?
Yep.
Thanks.
And then the turn I read is in this tab.
Okay,
It's
thank
going to be the first contention one. Tell me if you need help.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, but can you put on some shoes?
Absolutely.
Alright, that's your choice.
There you go. Exercise that authority.
Look, if you listen to the K, you know it's a K of shoes.
You can't link into your K, the shoes, baby.
I know.
Semiotic mean?
So that's like a system, it's a study of signs. You can use the floor.
Oh, I see.
I expect some security. As I mentioned in my paradigm that I only evaluate the one AR if it's 3.
We have 6 seconds left.
That's good.
Yeah, I have a lot of arguments written down, so. I'm going to try this one more time. Oh, yeah, right, I have 5. All right. Ready? Okay, so start on the negative case. So I have a couple of major problems with this. There's no way I'm going to refute every single point, so let's talk about it positionally. Sorry. Why did I start again?
I guess so.
Okay, start in the negative case. I have a few problems with this positionally. So first, let's talk about this radical evil. First, there's zero justification as to why we need some sort of radical evil, right? This is something that he posits the rest of the cards follow from. But I would suggest that we understand morality in day-to-day interactions. And a morality based on extremes is unworkable. We're unlikely to implement that in our daily lives because we are unlikely to encounter extreme evil on a day-to-day basis. I would actually say that this creates... I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I would posit that this actually undermines morality because people see it as inaccessible and unapplicable to their daily lives. So it makes morality unimportant. So I would say that this entire interpretation then is founded on a premise that does not actually help us get to ethics. Okay, that's the first problem. Second, I'd like to go to the app and extend my definition of justified, which means to prove, to show, to be just, right, or reasonable. So I get that he's saying that that's a normative sort of statement, but I don't think it has to be grounded in ethics. This is more of a sort of policy question, and sure, policy should be ethical, but it's not such an extreme view. A state actor or a person making an institutional decision is never going to use the framework that Tyler posits, so it's unworkable. So then extend my analysis, which says institutions, including government, schools, and companies, are the decision makers. So we have to look at the resolution from the point of the decision maker. A decision maker is never going to use Foucault or Agamben to make their decision, which means that his case is unworkable. And since this links directly to the resolution, it actually presupposes his analysis, because it means that his case does not actually access the resolution. It sort of exists, I guess, even before the resolution. And I would say we should start at the resolution in a debate round. That's the first thing we know coming in. Okay. So that's the first piece. So then, I think that the next thing I want to say is I think he absolutely bites his own criticism. If you specifically look at the alternative card, which I think is a Agamben, he's talking about language. He's saying that what we have to do is break ourselves out of the language and go to a more abstract level. The challenge is we need language to communicate that more abstract level. He's using language. He's using the same system. The dominant language of the earth, which is English. The English have taken over the world and institutionalized these biopolitical orders. He's biting into that by using English to communicate these things. So I would say that he does not get out of his own criticism either. Okay, next, I just want to point out, these cards are super super specific to talking about human rights. I'm not talking about human rights. I am generalizing everything into economics. So I'm not even talking about individuals at a certain level. So I don't think that I even bite it on that level, though he's certainly going to say I do because there's sort of capitalism. But economics is independent of capitalism. I'm saying that we can just quantify well-being. So I'm not saying like people should have more money per se. I'm saying we can quantify things. Like I could look at something in a socialist way and still look at it economically. I can still understand the economics of socialism. Okay. All right. My timer keeps going dark, so I know how much time I left. Okay, great. So I think that gets me out of the neg. Let's go down to the bottom. It's not pre-fiat. I show you why. I'm linking to the resolution directly. It's not a priori. I've already refuted why his ethical approach is wrong. Then he says he turns my case. I'm about to talk about that next, and that's going to group the next two. Go to the F. All right, extend the value. Proper institutional actions is the only one that links to the resolution. Extend Gooden, which says that we have to look at consequentials, and he just says that he impacts to that, so that's fine. Extend the criterion of maximizing economic benefit. It's the only way institutional decision makers can actually evaluate things. Again, that's the only link to the resolution. Then extend Courtney, which says that we should measure gains and losses. He says this links me to the K, but the K doesn't make any sense, especially based on what I refuted the top link. This doesn't mean that we don't value people. In fact, we value people more because they have inherent worth in an economic system. We can just quantify it. Now you can extend to Lou, which says that we have racial segregation.
Case.
Yeah.
I have two.
Not on the phone.
I'm sorry, I screwed up. I don't know how to get it to...
Yeah, okay. That was my problem. Okay.
Oh, okay, press that. Makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so the order is going to be turn on the AC. I screwed it up again. Someone have can you use your phone?
Yeah, I have an iPhone.
Or yeah, that's ideal. I know how to use
It would be
that.
helpful to be able to see your time.
Yeah.
Oh, but you probably shouldn't let it lock because
I can use hers.
Yeah, that's what could happen to me. It's really locked. That's just gonna lock.
Is there a way to stop that? Like make your phone
Yeah, you can
off?
turn the auto whatever off.
Where, how do you
25,
find
21.
So under
Settings,
settings, that's
yeah.
my password.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You know about that? I just
Or just
You-
touching the screen.
In general, then auto lock
And then it won't lock.
Okay. Is everyone ready?
Yeah, just turn off mine. Auto lock. That's very cool. Yeah, I'm ready.
We all just turn off our
Oh, I have to have mine on. I have work email on my phone.
Alright, everyone's good? So the first reason you're negating is the Alexander evidence, which he drops in her last speech. This was the turn made against her contention level offense. You can extend it. It says that affirmative action provides a roots of solvency leading to less action to reduce inequality. I give examples that, when people see that blacks are far more successful in being lawyers and figureheads like Barack Obama, then they forget the realities of racial inequality. And some of these include that the child poverty rate is higher today than it was in 1968, and employment rates in black communities rival those of third world countries. I said this had a better link to her standard because not only did it relate to this workforce, but also has to do with the reproduction of the ghetto, which produces those inequalities in the first place. Remember, she talked about housing inequalities and things like that. So whether or not you actually think this is a good argument, it's gone dropped. She doesn't claim to make any turns on the K, so the round is effectively over right here. She dropped a turn, isn't getting offense anywhere else. it's game over. But now let's go to the top of the AC. So like I floated her arguments kind of strangely, so you're gonna have to try to follow me a little bit. I'm sorry about that. I tried to flow them against what I thought they were against. So first we're going to go to the extension of justify, and she says that it's not grounded in ethics. However, first, remember that my framework specifically says any normative system, you can call for it after the round, which would include the one that she's going after. And then second, she says that nobody would ever use this framework, but that's not actually, so like that's the institutional analysis and our values, so let's go there now. So remember what I said about how this is going to be bad for institutions as well. For instance, institutions cause genocide. That's really bad. Second, the a priori framework precludes. I'm going to explain how she isn't sufficiently answering that. And you can go to the good in evidence and you can extend the argument that I link into the standard. This means that she can't exclude me through any of this economism and things like that. So I believe that's all the arguments that she tried to cross-apply from the AC. So now let's go to the K itself. She says that these are like just arguments against the position in general. I'm going to try to go over all of them. She said, good, this is one argument, but I actually floated as 3 arguments. She says, first, that the Meister evidence has 0 justification. However, the Meister evidence does have justification. It says the only way that a system of ethics can get off the ground initially is if there is consensual identification of evil. And you keep begging the question, why, etc. You'll have no foundation for ethics, no way to set up a normative system at all. Remember, I'm using the rhetoric of ethics, but it applies to any normative system. It's based on the supposition of a radical evil. Moreover, her second argument is that it's more important to talk about the day-to-day interactions. However, my framework can account for this and talk about day-to-day interactions. However, the justification for these day-to-day interactions are based on a radical evil. So, for instance, like we say that it's wrong to hurt someone, but only because that resembles the actions taking place at places like the Holocaust. Remember, she doesn't provide any like standard for how day-to-day it has to be, so don't let her make that in the 2AR for like, you know, how day-to-day it has to be or why it can't be derived from a more general system. And then the third argument is that this undermines morality because it doesn't deal with the day-to-day, and this is the psychology stuff. You can cross-apply the arguments I made against what I called the second, but remember, you can follow this as like ABC or something for that. Now she says that I have no link because these are all really specific to human rights. However, something she said in her last speech was that people are intrinsically worthy. In other words, she's intermingling politics and economics. Moreover, she drops the link on the AC, so even if this argument is true, you would still negate. I'm going to extend the K like all at once, so that's why I'm going over the arguments and then I'm going to extend it. Next, you can go to the Deleuze and Guattari 2 evidence, which is the alternative. She says that this is like abstract and stuff like that, but I'm still talking in language. The point is not that we shouldn't talk in language, but instead that we should create a counter-discourse as opposed to modernity and biopolitics and things of that nature. And so what this means is not that like you can't speak in language, but instead that we need to have a becoming minor in our own language. We need to be things like poets and artists who can create new realities and alternatives. And then the rest of our arguments were against the reasons why you would negate. However, they all rely on the previous arguments which are already refuted. So now you go to the Meister evidence. I've already explained this. All normative systems are based upon a consensus of a radical evil. We ought to say that is the Holocaust because that is the worst abuse of human beings that we have seen in history, and she doesn't contest this. Next, you can extend the Gottman evidence. You can clearly see how she links to this. She mixes people, or like bare life itself is politicized. The fact that people are living is political. Remember, she uses rhetoric like human capital, things like that. By the very fact that they are kept alive, they are political objects, and so their lives and politics become indistinguishable, and that's what biopolitics is. Now you can extend the Foucault evidence that in the name of protecting large population, wars are more and more vital to protect the entirety of the population, and they're more severe, and it makes massacres a necessity to protect the rest of the population. Remember, she doesn't contest this. And you can extend the Deleuze and Guattari 2 evidence, which explains that we need a counter-discourse to modernity in order to provide the possibility for emancipation. The point is not a macro-political program which could provide an alternative to capitalism, but instead reducing our own micro-fascisms through the language and articulations that we have in ourselves. It's about fighting the fascism within each of us. So now you can extend the first argument that comes pre-fiat. She says she links to the resolution, this comes first, but she doesn't refute the pre-fiat argument, which is essentially the fiat is illusory and the pre-fiat stuff is real, and so you should vote on that. Next, you can extend the a priori argument. She says she, doesn't link, but she does, and so you ought to vote on the turn and then the K. Remember the turn; it's important and when dropped.
You have 6 seconds.
And that would be great. There you go. Thanks.
We should turn it so it doesn't lock.
I did.
Oh,
Alright. Okay, so I'm way behind right now. We'll be clear about that. First thing I want to talk about is, I think this got a lot clearer in the NR. So I encourage you not to vote on anything that was clear in the NR that wasn't clear in the NC. So if you didn't understand it before, it's really not fair to let them use English language that we can understand in the NR and language we can't understand in the NC. So I first encourage that. The second thing I want to talk about is I'd like to extend the point where I say, or let's go to the part. So I'm going to, you can ignore the turn because I'm not going to go for my standard. So that links to my standard, doesn't matter. Let's look at his case. So he says that he doesn't, in my opinion, really refute this idea that it's not really accessible to people. He says that that's just sort of not true, that we have to agree on something, and then he just, first of all, never extends the actual warrant out of the card. He paraphrases it and makes it English. So first, don't think that that really suffices as an extension of a warrant in the card. So I'd like for you to extend my first argument, which was that this makes it inaccessible because we have to have some sort of major genocide before we can even talk about ethics. That's inaccessible to people on a day-to-day basis. That means they're not going to use it. He says that that's not true because we sort of agree and then we can use it. But I don't think that's really an answer. He never says why a person would be incentivized to use this type of ethical system. So that's the first reason I think that you should reject it. There's sort of no incentive for an individual to use this system. Okay? But it's really the only system in the round, so let's move on from that. He doesn't really refute that he's fighting his own criticism. He paraphrases that card, but you can read the card after the round. It talks about Chomsky, and what it specifically says is that we have to escape the language and create our own language. He offers no separate discourse for us to talk about, and he uses the dominant language in the world. So he is fighting his own discourse, which means that at a minimum, we're at a non-unique level, right? We're talking about, we're both biting into biopolitics. He's doing it in the round, I'm doing it in the round. So on that level, I think that there's no sort of unique offense. Now, you can extend that. That means that there's nothing really unique about what he's advocating. Additionally, I'm kicking the app, so I'm not even fighting his criticism anymore because I'm not extending any sort of advocacy that is economic in any way. So, now you have no offense. I encourage you to vote for me because it's a lot harder to affirm. I'm a woman, we're talking about affirmative action, and there are only 2 women in this tournament, and that means that I think from this identity, this notion that we have problems with biopolitics, something that would absolutely change the system is if a woman were to win a debate tournament, which does not happen very often, especially at ones that are super technical.